Minia, mpanyifo komase bi se asem hoyi empenipa ne bomnipa na epene ho asem. Sisi amene wo ekase de Dennis Miracles Aboagye nachi egu ho a enye fadi agro. Na nsen na yokofo ebebefa ano because say obose wadi bone bi. Na atabo mo befa ano no a na owo omo akache no yokofo e de krata bi ba beto abontia na omo state the reason why ntia omo ba befa Dennis Miracles Aboagye na wo ababedi omo akache. Na sakrata na da bonti no Dennis Miracles Aboagye onya kwan eba abonti ya yemani bill no e na all ba beka say sakrata na da bonti no e force because that wasn't the reason tia yokofo e friend when I say omo eba bechi no it is yokofo if they arrest him for one reason na omo eba bonti ebe kan different thing na say omo adwuma no kra na omo no propaganda work bi na omo ye na it was influenced by higher political authority be and a Dennis Miracles Aboagye or call Facebook war any political platform be a obenya no ko kan saa nsam ni na yesese nipa oyire won nsam wa ye dey yebu etiti na oyire ni na yokofo so na obuti na omo ehwe no enu ti omo de na omo nibi na omo eti asem no omo enyamu na wei enene yenya ntiti ye say Dennis Miracles Aboagye yoko isiki order say na japade biala owo no they should freeze it until they have frozen his properties ebi landed properties na ehon keka ho na emna ye che na wo ba abonten no o be ka sansem ni nyina no TV3 for report bi de fa na nsem na o de bi gu abonten na wo ka se yokofo de omo ka no enye no kro no omo report bi de fa ho ne ya me na wo ka se yi so trended se Dennis Miracles Aboagye na japa de biala owo no aban age de free nsem ma yenkuti the first arrest no ye no ne nsem a obeka ye TV3 for a report ye no ye wia me de ene video de no so nsem a yokofo de ababegu abontin after say musiki sa court order say onfa infreeze na japade no me de no so ebeto aso e de ma na wo hwe video no nyina e wia besro na wachire wadwi e bo comment section ho unya en subscribe ya na wa subscribe e de ma me like video na share mo bi no so unya bi ewe sisi ya de Dennis Miracles Aboagye na chi egu.
But we also know that this morning, Dennis Miracles Aboagye, the man at the center of this, has been talking about this issue for the first time since his release from EOCO. And he talks about a false narrative around his arrest. I want us to go over that now because he starts off with a chronology of events starting about 4 days ago. And he says it's just 1 day after he declared his intention to serve as National Communications Director for the NPP. Now, here comes the false narrative that he pushes out himself. A false narrative was put out about my arrest, but Ghanaians are not fools, and neither are the good people of the New Patriotic Party. The facts and the truth will prevail. He goes on in that post also to tell us what the facts are, according to him. So for the records, he says there was no discussion of any 55 million cedis with me by EOCO, none at all, he emphasizes. Then he goes on to say that if the intention was to break him, it has failed. If the intention was to scare me, it has failed spectacularly. I will lead the NPP's communications directorate to command the narrative, and no sell, no false story, no intimidation will change that. So that's what we're hearing from Dennis Miracles Aboagye, who was released from EOCO's custody late last night after his home was inspected after meeting bail conditions. Remember, 50 million cedis bail condition, but 3 sureties, 2 to be justified. He went home in the late hours of the evening after meeting those conditions. But when he got home, he decided to put out his own narrative of what has happened. He says that he believes this is a targeting of sort. He doesn't say that in clear words, but when you go back and you watch, you listen to what he said so far. He says 4 days ago, just 1 day after I declared my intention to serve our great party, he was picked up and detained by EOCO. Then he says a false narrative is being put out there, but the Ghanaian people are no fools. They know, they can read in between the lines and know what is happening. Now, it tells us something. Then he goes on to talk about setting the record straight, no discussion around 55 million cedis, because that is what EOCO has talked about, that there are investigations into misappropriation of Cøurt funds amounting to some 55 million cedis, some of which he says one person who served as an accountant during the tenure of Dennis Miracles Aboagye, as Executive Secretary for Amcod, is starting to refund. But to be fair, EOCO in their statement does not mention exactly what Dennis's role is in this, except to tell us some of the cases that they think, you know, they are bringing against Dennis Miracles Aboagye, which includes stealing, includes causing financial loss to the state and the likes. There are about 7 of them, including what EOCO says are other suspected offenses. Now, they don't explain that, but they talk about a host others: money laundering, stealing, causing financial loss to the state. But Dennis says, look, on the subject of 55 million cedis, there was no conversation between myself and EOCO at any point in time. Now, let me clarify the at any point in time, because EOCO tells us, look, investigations have been going on for at least a year now. They've had meetings in the past with Dennis Miracles Aboagye by virtue of the fact that he was at the helm of affairs in that office as Executive Secretary of Amcod. But this afternoon, Dennis is telling us that of all the conversations we've had, we've not talked about 55 million cedis at any point in time. He goes on to say none at all. And then he says, let me be clear. If the intention was to break me, it has failed. If the intention was to scare me, it has failed spectacularly. I will lead NPP's Communications Directorate to command the narrative, and no sell, no false story, no intimidation will change that. A High Court in Accra has confirmed an order freezing 5 bank accounts and 4 landed properties belonging to Dennis Miracles Aboagye as part of a wider freeze covering accounts linked to one Gerard Apia and the company Hillside Piggery and Meat Processing Limited. The order was granted on an application filed by the Economic and Organized Crime Office. Dennis Miracles, the former Executive Secretary of the Interministerial Coordinating Committee on Decentralization, was arrested in connection with alleged stealing and misappropriation of 55 million cedis of public funds by EOCO. Now, Miracles, who denies the claims, however, has seen his accounts and properties frozen as part of investigations ongoing into the matter and other claims against him. There's a bit more on this story, details of the freezes, the journey so far for Miracles. Remember that he was arrested and then kept behind in the coolest of EOCO for a little bit. Moana is going to show us the journey so far and what we are learning about the property freezes, bank account freezes. Moana, what do we know?
Right, so the journey does start somewhere in July, right? Around July 14, we were here where Christian Yale was at the EOCO head office. He had been arrested upon his return to the country. The NPP had issued flyers, amongst many other things, seeking an explanation as to why he'd been picked up, right? This is what EOCO told us after that he was arrested in connection with a former accountant general Apia in connection with investigations into alleged financial and procurement irregularities at the Interministerial Coordinating Committee on Decentralization. And I'm going to skip this part because the third slide is where the meat is, right? Investigators suspect the misappropriation, misapplication, diversion, and theft of approximately 55 million cedis in public funds. The suspects are being investigated for conspiracy to steal, stealing, and using public office for personal profit. Other alleged offenses including causing financial loss to the state, dissipation of public funds, defrauding by false pretenses, and money laundering, as well as other suspected offenses. So this was the details as EOCO provided and sought to explain a bit more as to why he had been picked up. Now, subsequently, he was granted bail in the regions of around 50 million cedis thereabout, with sureties and landed properties. Those conditions were met. Now, upon his release to bail, due to bail, Miracles Aboagye denied flatly that he had ever been spoken to whilst he was with EOCO about this 55 million cedis. And subsequently, when Kemeni spoke to the Deputy Attorney General, he mentioned specifically that what Dennis Miracles Aboagye was saying was not accurate. And in fact, investigators did ask him about that 55 million cedis. But fast forward, what are we learning? What we're learning, amongst many other things, is that a court has confirmed the freeze orders against properties belonging to Dennis Aboagye, right? What are these? Now, we're talking about 2 landed properties, right, in the eastern region. 2 in the eastern region, land and a house in the eastern region. Then in the Greater Accra region, 2 landed properties again, residential apartments and residential properties as well as 5 bank accounts. All have been frozen by EOCO and have same been confirmed by a court of law as we understand today. And so as we speak, the investigations are continuing into Dennis Miracles Aboagye in connection with Gerald Appiah, who were both with that committee on decentralization at the presidency over 55 million cedis and other related matters. But the freeze order has been confirmed by the court, and that is what we know at this particular point in time in relation to Miracles Aboagye and the freeze order. Our phone lines are being worked and as well to establish a response as well from him in relation to this particular subject matter.